oftentimes people will say, I'm an extrovert or I'm an introvert. But in reality, you're not just falling into a bucket, right? Everything exists on some sort of spectrum. When we talk to people, at least when I talk to people at work, we'll oftentimes have this conversation. Oh, yeah, I'm a strong extrovert or I'm an introvert. When in reality, some of them are, right? Very polar, but most people fall somewhere in the middle. What's up, Dave?
Good afternoon, Rob Patterson. How are you?
Doing okay. Doing okay. I have a story to start us off with today. A story and a question.
Okay. Okay.
I was recently at an event. How do you describe when you're around people who aren't in our field? How do you describe what we do?
I say I'm a psychologist, and then I go, but not that kind. I work with businesses.
Hmm. All
That's
right.
usually
So,
what I say.
and that's the extent of it. All right.
Yeah.
So I was at an event recently, and as you do, you're talking with a bunch of other adults, and what do you do for work? And so, went through my spiel, which is similar. I'd say I'm a psychologist, but yeah, but applied to business and to organizations. And so it's working with individuals, but I also work with teams and the organization itself and all that kind of stuff. But what this person really wanted to talk about was more like, clinical psychology therapy type of things. She got into, after some conversation, talking about personality assessments. And of course, what you and I do is a bit more in depth, the types of tools that we use. But she brought up the Myers-Briggs, the MBTI.
Hmm.
And I guess a couple of years ago, I think I remember hearing this. There was a documentary that came out, maybe on Netflix, about the Myers-Briggs. Does that ring a bell to you?
It was on HBO. I think it
Okay.
was HBO, and I recorded a hate video about it and put it on YouTube. So yes, I've heard of it.
What was the hate video about?
I've thought of little else since then, Rob. It's been like 4 years of just pent up rage about this video. Uh, what I didn't like about it was that they categorized personality assessments that are used for selection as if they were all the Myers Briggs. And so they were saying essentially, look how invalid the Myers Briggs is. And all of these companies are using these assessments for hiring, and the whole industry is a crock.
Yep.
And then it was like them just sort of going into depth, going deep on the impact of these tools, which aren't valid or reliable, and how they impact people. But one of the not characters, one of the people that was complaining about it is saying, this has really damaged me. And then I therefore made a complaint. And you're watching, you're thinking, hey, man, if you're that reactive, well, maybe that's the problem.
Yeah.
At the end of the video, he completes suicide.
Oh,
And so
geez.
it's like this idea that these assessments created this kind of dynamic. And that's part of the reason why this person is no longer alive. And it
Oh,
just
so
like,
that's what the documentary was trying to do, is say as a result of him being identified as these couple letters.
as a result of this industry that stops people from getting jobs, this person is no longer alive.
Oh,
Yeah.
geez.
That's how, yeah. So I did not love the video.
Yeah. I I'd imagine not. Yeah, and I think a lot of people who are in our field would have strong opinions about that. I've not seen it, but I remember there was a lot of chatter about it a couple of years ago. In fact, I
Mhm,
should watch that. Um, but it got me thinking. That conversation got me thinking about personality tools.
mhm.
There are a ton of personality tools out there. We use them in our job. We use a variety of them. They are certainly out and about in the world. People believe that I'm sure there's varying levels of understanding of these tools and what they say, what they mean, what they don't mean. Um, and I'd say it's a pretty broad net of how people would define what these tools are. So I thought we would talk a little bit about these tools because it sounds like you're gonna have a strong reaction to some of these tools in a way that I used to, but I've come around a little bit to seeing their utility.
Yeah, you say come around, I think devolved, but yeah.
Giving up,
Yeah. That's
drank the Kool-Aid. Yeah. Th
yeah,
This podcast is sponsored by the Myers-Briggs
yeah.
Company. No, but I thought we would talk a little bit about these different types of tools, including the Myers-Briggs and tools that are used prevalently in organizations, why they're used, the upsides, the downsides, and kind of how we think about it. Sound good?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
So, just real quickly, for those who are not familiar, we'll use the Myers Briggs as an example of what I would call a personality type indicator tool or a personality typology. So, without getting too nerdy and boring most of you who are listening here, there are different ways that psychologists who study personality will think about it. Most psychologists, and this is part of the reason I think there's um, why psychologists will take issue with some of these tools, think of a variety of different personality characteristics on a spectrum. So, in other words, let's use one as an example. So, extroversion. Oftentimes, people will say, I'm an extrovert or I'm an introvert. But in reality, you're not just falling into a bucket, right? Everything exists on some sort of spectrum. When we talk to people, at least when I talk to people at work, we'll oftentimes have this conversation. Oh, yeah, I'm a strong extrovert or I'm an introvert. When in reality, some of them are, right? Very polar, but most people fall somewhere in the middle. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
100%.
So that is how, psychologists oftentimes will think about personality and personality characteristics, extroversion being an example. These typology tools or these type tools, as opposed to looking at things in spectrums, although some of them do to some extent, they tend to just focus on buckets. Like for the Myers Briggs, right? You're either an extrovert or an introvert because people go around. I've even seen it. Have you seen this before? Like sometimes people will have these tags of I'm an ENTJ or strengths
I
finders. My
I
top strengths are this.
I can't tell you how I hate it. I hate it so much, Rob.
It-
That
I,
so I don't know when you want me to I'm ready, just I want you to I that the mentality of having a sign of here's my personality type and this is how I like to be interacted with, that the arrogance I cannot stand.
oh, so why is it arrogant?
Something's wrong with me, but I've just when I have seen it is I go into this is like the standard thing for me is I go into go whatever client wants me to come in and do some kind of leadership development thing. And I walk in, every office, people have little blocks up that have their whatever it is. It's their
Right.
strengths or it's their MBTI, whatever. I'm a INTJ. And what does that mean? Well, it means that when you talk to me, I prefer it to be one-on-one, and I would like you to be more sort of detailed about I want you to structure projects a certain way so I can keep track of the projects. And I would like for you to, whatever.
So it's telling you how to act, how to behave. You don't
Yeah,
like it.
yeah, it's like me holding a sign and being like, this is how I vote, so interact with me in accordance with my belief system."
Or it might be like someone else who has an email signature that says, "Pardon my brevity and all of my mistakes." Like, if someone did that, like, that really pisses me off. Like, oops, like, I don't really care. Like, who would do that, right?
That I Now that's appropriate,
Oh,
okay?
that's appropriate.
Yeah.
So the reason I bring this up, of course, is because Dave, when he sends emails from his phone or from a personal email address, that's his signature.
And
Now,
it means so hey, this guy, he's
yes,
out of pocket
yeah,
and
not out
part
of pocket, just not paying attention.
no, out of no, it means my phone is in my pocket, I'm out of pocket. Isn't that what it means?
Oh, out of pocket means like when I hear the word out of pocket or the term, I think it's like I'm on vacation, like I'm not available.
Oh, I thought it meant like the phone's in your pocket and it's out of my pocket to write this note.
No,
All right, whatever.
you're wrong.
It means that, pardon my brevity and my spelling, this is from my iPhone.
Yeah, I read it as I'm not going to pay attention to how grammatically correct anything is here. I'm just kind of so essentially you're putting your strengths finders on there, it's just in a different way. So
That's
it's very ironic
You could
that you
probably
do that.
tell my, Myers-Briggs type by that note.
I was baiting you into doing because I know how you feel about that stuff, and I couldn't wait for you to have a strong reaction to this, and I had this chambered and ready to go. So thank you for doing this for
Yeah,
me.
I didn't take I lasted like 5 minutes, so
Yeah,
yeah.
you did. But I also have a similar I have a similar reaction sometimes to that. I mean, it's no harm, but yeah, sometimes I think, well, what do you want me to do with this?
Mhm.
So, do you want me to adjust to you? And it depends on the situation. If I'm at work and I'm working with someone, like a client, then sure, I'll adjust. But like in my everyday environment, yeah, I don't react too well to some of
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I also struggle sometimes because I think people really dive hard into it, like, oh, this is me. Yeah, to a T.
Mhm.
And you
Mhm.
actually introduced, and we're jumping around here a little bit, but you introduced me to a term a couple of years ago, a cognitive fallacy, the Barnum effect.
Mhm.
Do you want to explain what that is?
Yeah, the Barnum effect is the reason why, well, like, horoscopes exist,
Mm-hmm.
which is, like, when if we if somebody that you perceive to be an authority, and that could be a person or the test results, if they vaguely describe your personality or your experiences, like from a psychological standpoint, you will distort how you see yourself to fit that vague description. So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm in the checkout line and I get that horoscope scroll, it says, "Oh, you're a Libra, so whatever, you're emotional this month." You'll be like, "Yeah, that freaking neighbor keeps putting his trash can, whatever," and I'll shoehorn in some kind of experience to fit that description.
Yep.
And so I think that that's what happens when, I mean, it's an interesting thing. Like horoscopes is the example that like stands out to me because it's like in no way is that tethered to, in my opinion, in no way is that tethered to reality. And there's like
Well, I don't think you have to say in your opinion. It's not. You
there's
can want
zero,
it to be, but it's not.
but we still hear you still read your type, and you're like, oh, I am a Cancer. Do you know what I mean? That whatever. I don't know what the I am mercurial, and that's why
Right.
I'm whatever a Zorro. I mean,
Yeah.
I just think
I like two things about that. First, I agree. Second, I don't think anyone, I loved your reference because I remember those from the grocery store, those little scrolls when I was
yeah,
a kid.
yes.
I don't think anyone under the age of 30 has any idea what you're talking about. But you're right. I loved those things as a kid.
Oh,
Those things
that's
don't exist anymore, right?
I think that's good feed because I always give that example of the scroll, but if no
I
one
know
kn
exactly what you're talking about.
yeah.
But I imagine people who were born like in the mid 90s and later have no
Oh, mhm.
reference to that. So yeah, there's these different typologies that just bucket people into different ways. So there's the Myers-Briggs, and that's I think that's the oldest one that I'm familiar with. I mean, my
It
memory is that this is a tool that came out like around World War II, generated by two non-psychologists.
yeah, I think that the only one that I know that's older than that is the, oh,
Enneagram.
Enneagram. Yeah, the Enneagram, because it was such an iterative process to create it, it's been around, I think, longer,
Yeah, you're
but
right.
less. I mean, there's more than one Enneagram.
Hmm.
There's more than one website that holds the I mean, so there's less structure around at least the Myers-Briggs, there is a specific so it's probably the most, like, established tool.
I would say
In my
particularly in organizations. Like if
Mhm,
any organization uses a tool like this, one of these typology tools, it's likely to be the Myers-Briggs.
mhm.
Um, and that really started in earnest more in the 70s and early 80s, and it blew up from there. But there are other tools like this. So for folks like I've taken the DISC assessment, I've taken the Myers-Briggs, I've taken the Enneagram. Recently, there is one. It's from Lencioni. It's like the Five Geniuses.
I have
I feel
not
like this is. I've not
is it
taken
good?
it.
Haven't taken that one.
I haven't taken it, but a couple organizations that I work with have recently started to talk more about that. So I need to look into that one more. But
Mhm,
yeah, it buckets different personality characteristics and tendencies to make it easier for people to use and to
mhm,
understand.
mhm. In my opinion, it's taking something that is, uh, arguably, like, the most nuanced thing about somebody, the most intricate piece of who they are, the most
Hmm.
complex part of who they are, and we go like, "Nah, you're not all this nuance. You're a you're a blue. That's it." That and like, "Oh, like, I'm blue and or, I'm a 3 and I have a wing of a 2," or whatever, like, we just, like,
Oh
distill
yeah, what's that?
so
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
into oversimplifying such complexity.
Right, and that's and I think that's the downside of it is it risks causing people to think that they can. understand themselves and other people at that level when there's so much more going on. I think for a long time, I liken the like those types of tools to BuzzFeed. Like what Harry Potter character are you, right? I can tell what you ate for breakfast if you answer these 7 questions about your
Yeah.
favorite movies from the 90s. Because I think it, especially for those of us who dive into who are psychologists and those who know a lot about psychology, we look at these tools and they're only face valid. They
Mhm,
just make sense, but there's not a lot of research or data
mhm.
behind them. So I think that's a critique that I have. You mentioned another one, which is it takes something that is actually really complex and it makes it pretty shallow.
Yep.
What are other issues with it?
For me, the sort of like the dividing line is, would this tool that you're using hold up in court? And if the research isn't there to have this tool hold up in court, then what are we doing? You
Okay.
know, like, so for example, the Myers-Briggs does not have the validity data or the reliability data to hold up in court. That is not admissible. You would never see someone get hired because of, I would say, you should never see somebody hired or fired as a consequence of that kind of a tool. You shouldn't be fired for any tool, but do you know what I'm saying? It should not be part of the hiring process because the data isn't there. It's the same thing with the Enneagram. If you go onto the Enneagram's website, it says very clearly in black and white, there is no science backing up this. This is not a scientifically validated tool. But for some reason, we're just like, oh, but I want to know what my number is. I think it cheapens what we do, or it cheapens people.
Yeah. So I want to make sure to put a clarifying point for people listening or watching. So some tools are created to help organizations make hiring decisions for different roles because they are predictive of someone's effectiveness in a role.
Yes.
So there's certain tools like you and I use these types of tools in
Hmm.
our work. There are certain tools that are created for the purpose of doing that. There are other tools like the Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram or the DISC that are not created to do that. And on their websites, to your point, that's what they say. In preparation for this, I just went back to the Myers-Briggs website and it says, yes, it's not validated to be used as predictive of performance. And I think that's an issue, especially in organizational psychology in my PhD program that was drilled into us very quickly and very routinely. That's
Mhm,
why these tools are shit. It's because they have no predictive what they would say predictive validity. It
mhm,
doesn't predict success in a role.
mhm, mhm. I also don't like the arrogance of somebody who is interpreting the test, acting like they know who I am because of my 4 letters. And sometimes I feel like these tools are used that way, where on the Enneagram, I think I'm a 3 or a 4, I can't remember, 3 or a 4, but
Yeah. I'm not as
people
familiar with that one.
people will know that assessment. They're like, "Oh, you're a 3 wing 2, that's is what you are." And I'm like, "You don't know who do you don't know anything about me." And I don't like that. I feel like it makes people that don't have good insight into you think that they know all about you. It's like the tools are designed to be easy to use. Their tools are oversimplified so that for the consumer, for friends and family to talk about, but not really to have insight into who you are.
But so this is where I'm going to disagree. Is I get what you're saying,
Yeah.
but if you had to look at the Enneagram or your Myers-Briggs results or anything like that, right? Would you say high level, shallow, high level that they're incorrect?
That no.
You
Reluctantly
wouldn't
no.
say that. Okay.
Like, let's do the Myers-Briggs, and maybe people, so my Myers-Briggs type is ENFP.
Mhm.
So, and I think when I told you that, you were like, "That's not a surprise."
Yeah.
Right? So I admit, reluctantly, I will acknowledge, and people that have, like, listened to our podcast could probably have picked. I mean, it would be interesting to see if people could hear this, if they know the tool, would they know what our type is?
Right.
You know what I mean? So there is some validity there, but I think that my ENFP looks very different than somebody else's ENFP. Like, I can
Sure.
see those traits in me, but how it manifests in my behavior, I think, differs significantly from
Uh,
other people. You know what I mean?
definitely. Definitely. And I think that's where I've started to come around more on these types of tools because until the past couple of years, honestly, my initial reaction to hearing that, especially if I was working with a client who said, "Oh yeah, I've taken this and this is what it means," or yeah, for some reason the strengths finders really gets at me. Like I think it's like we've talked about in earlier episodes, just people focusing on their strengths and then, well, I'm a woo, and that just means I get really jazzed about stuff. Woos wouldn't talk like that. I'm a woo. I get really jazzed about stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and then that's just me. And it's like, well, it is. It doesn't have to be all the time. And there are other things you bring to the table, and you could also tone that down at times. So
Yeah.
that one really gets at me.
Yes.
Like, let's not just focus on things that are going well. Like, we can also, it's okay to focus on things that aren't going well, that are deficiencies, and doesn't mean you're a bad person, but we all have them, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
I remember I had to do this is earlier on in my career. I had to do a team building for a client that used the strengths finders. And it was again, I had maybe a year or two of experience. So I was like, sure, I'll do it. But if someone asked me to do that now, I think I would still say yes, but it would be a reluctant yes.
Because
Because
you so
yes.
disagree.
Again,
You
it's not
so hate
rational.
positive psychology
Yeah.
that you're
It's not rational. It's just like, well, can we not just focus? Like we can focus on things that aren't great. It's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I have had the experience. I created a workshop called Mental Judo, and I was, like, sort of going through, like, what are I was trying to talk about, like, what are the prevailing perspectives on how we operate, right? So
Hmm.
one was Angela Duckworth. I'm talking about grit.
Hmm.
And another one, I'm talking about growth mindset, Carol Dweck. And then I'm talking about StrengthsFinder. And it's a real task to try and make all of these seem like they work together, right? Because StrengthsFinder and um, you know, having a growth mindset are very different
Yeah.
mentality. You know what I mean? And these are both very reputable psychological perspectives, but it takes some mental gymnastics to get those two things to operate in alignment
Yeah.
with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I
Yeah.
would agree with you. If you told me, like, pick one that makes more sense, I would definitely lean into growth mindset.
Yeah.
I think that that's I think that talent, and I think that I mean, I think talent is way overrated. I think believing that you can improve is way more important,
Yep.
you know?
Yep. Anyway, I got us down a rabbit hole, but I would say so. I am an ENTJ. So you and I are similar until we get to the last one.
Yes.
On the Myers-Briggs.
But just kind of say this, speaking of your J, the amount of difficulty you had hanging that light behind you does not feel very J. I think you were that was an aspirational J on your
Aspirational J. I want to make that into something else. I just don't know what it is.
part.
Aspirational J. That's like the name of like a beat poet or something like that. Um,
Yeah, that's your
but
rapper name.
yeah, it would be mine. Uh, uh, yeah, I mean, again, I think if you and I didn't know each other
Mhm.
and we heard that we interacted a couple times, we would both say, "Oh, yeah, we're both pretty extroverted."
Yep.
Um, what are the other what E and then
In Intuition.
intuition? Yep.
Yep.
So yeah, we both tend to, again, abstract, more theoretical, high level thinkers.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, F, right? I'm like a because there's a bit of a spectrum here. I'm barely an F, but yeah, I mean, we're both psychologists,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
a bit more empathetic and feeling, unsurprising.
Mhm. Mhm.
So again, I don't think there's it, it- it's it's not wrong. It's just incomplete.
Mhm. I think also part of the challenge, if we're talking about the Myers-Briggs in particular, as far as, like, it being incomplete, and I wish I had the research, like, top of mind, but those categories, so you have introversion versus extroversion, you have sensing versus intuition, you have thinking
Hmm.
versus feeling, judgment versus perceiving. Those are the global
Yep.
buckets.
Yep.
Those global buckets don't line up with the like what we think what most psychologists sort of would refer to as the big 5 personality traits. So most more comprehensive personality tools. I don't know how far in the weeds you want to get here, but like the most personality tools will talk about how open you are to experience, how conscientious you are, how extroverted you are, how agreeable you are, and then how neurotic you are.
Yep.
And those 5, there's the concern with the Myers-Briggs is those 5 aren't totally addressed by those 4 dichotomies created by the Myers-Briggs. And so the part of the question
Correct.
is, how did these psychologists or not psychologists, but these people just come up with like, where does the Myers-Briggs come from? There's
Well,
not the same theoretical foundations.
yeah, it does lack some of that foundation. I mean, I think broadly it comes from, you know, one of the original modern psychologists, Carl Jung. He made some observations just working with people. I think he was what, German, um,
I think
back
so.
in the teens and like 19 teens, 1920s.
I did not know that, Rob.
Yeah.
Jung was involved with the Myers-Briggs? I
Hmm.
mean, his theories were involved with the
Yeah.
Myers-Briggs.
Yeah. That's where the two individuals who came up with the tool, that was at least part of their high level foundation.
But a lot of that psychoanalytic, psychodynamic theory is also less tethered to reality,
Sure.
right? Like Jung's involved with dream interpretation.
Hmm.
There, I mean, Freud had some unique theories. Some stuff I look at and go like, "Wow, that makes sense," but it wasn't like it was all
Right.
there's not a bunch of research supporting everything that you know what I mean?
Correct. Yeah, it was more again intuition and
Yeah.
observation across a number of different people and him trying to make sense of all that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so I mean, yeah, there isn't a formal theoretical underpinning like a lot of modern psychological theories or recent psychological theories would have. But I mean, something high level does exist.
Yeah.
Um,
I did not just pausing on it. I did not know that they were influenced by Jung.
mhm,
That's really interesting.
mhm. But yeah, so I would say, given that these tools can be helpful, especially to dip your toe in some sort of self understanding. So you talked about, the five factors. So without getting again too nerdy here, right? I mean, those of us who spend a lot of time in personality psychology, right? There is a more well researched, more complex and comprehensive kind of theory of personality that get at those different factors that
Mhm.
Dave mentioned.
Mhm.
And then there's a lot of different sub factors within all of those.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that is one that is more broadly valid. And some of those characteristics that you talked about can be very predictive of performance or effectiveness in an organizational setting, which is where the rubber meets the road for us. If we're helping organizations help, identify who's going to be effective in a role, we want our understanding of a person to be complete and
Mhm.
backed by data and research, not just backed by intuition.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so that's part of the issue that I think a lot of us who practice this have is, well, it has no validity for that. Well, not every tool needs to have that validity. Mm. At the same time, it's still used for that. One of the stories I tell, when I first started working where we work now, I partnered with a law firm who used either the Myers Briggs or the DISC as part of their screening process.
Oh, that's dangerous.
It is.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, hold on, you're a bunch of lawyers. Now, granted, they weren't employment lawyers, but I'm like, I don't know who did this for you, but this is not right. You're going to get sued
Yeah.
if you do this.
Yeah.
So I think that's the orientation that a lot of us will
Mhm.
have is you're not using this for the right reasons, but there's a lot more than that. It's on the developmental side tue.
Yeah. I think
I
you're
like it for that.
yeah, I think you're right. I can come to your side of the aisle on that because there's actually a good question, which is like, why does it matter what the theoretical underpinnings of the assessment are? Or if it's not totally valid, does it matter? If the goal is just self-exploration, or what there's no harm in, I mean, you're this is a tool that's helping people think about themselves
Mhm.
because I get my Myers-Briggs type and I have to look at it and go, really, am I using intuition more than I'm using data or sensing? What why? And that does force me to reflect on why that outcome. And I get
Yep.
you're right. That is a net positive.
Yep. So I like it for that. It's good, I think, for that individual self-exploration, and then taking it to the next level. We're talking about working with teams. I think these tools are easy ways to introduce people to some
Mhm,
of these concepts and understand how to best work together.
mhm, mhm.
So if we have similar tendencies and patterns, how does that help us work better together, and how does that cause conflict?
Let's just assume, for argument's sake, that your J was in some way accurate. He's
Okay.
really I know he's a P, but let's just say he wanted to be a J, so he's a J. So, let's just say that you're a J and I'm more of a P. And by the way, I am a strong by the way, why do these letters sound sexual?
That's what I was saying before. Like you said a reluctant J, and I was like, God, it sounds like it could be sexual, but
Yeah.
it's not. A reluctant P, maybe a bit more.
Sounds I'm a hard P, I think. Alright.
That's
But
that's what I was trying to get at.
I'm a 30 on the P scale, extreme
Extreme hard
extreme
P.
P,
Yeah.
okay?
Okay.
Um, so if you know that about I guess the question for you is, knowing that I am P and that you're J, what would you do different in how you interact with me, like, as coworkers?
Well, so an example would be because you're more spontaneous, less structured, less organized, I could come to expect that. Which is why you have that ridiculous disclaimer in your emails, right? That's only someone who is like that would do that.
So you need to be more tolerant.
Tolerant, understanding. Um, I may be, I may want to take a different role. So if I was working like someone like me who is more on the organized side of things, at least compared to you, um, it would be helpful for me to know. All right, well, we're both going to be idea people. Um, we're both going to want to talk a lot. We're both going to do this, and you know, Dave is going to be less likely to dig into some of the details and the processes.
Mhm, mhm,
So either we need to talk about who's going to do what roles and responsibilities up front, or it's going to be more maybe on me because I'm going to be a bit more exacting in that area to
mhm,
take charge of that because
mhm,
you're not going to care as much.
mhm. I guess my thought is, like, if that's your that might be your experience from working with me, or like, for example, if you had asked me to guess your type, I would have thought that you're an ENFP, right? I don't think you're a J.
Yeah.
I
I
understand
mean,
that you're
this is 9 years old. I think I'm less that way than I used to be.
but so, like, isn't my experience of you being closer to the middle or even on the P side, that's what I should be paying attention to when I think about working with Rob, not what set of 4 blocks you have on your desk. Like, does the you know what I mean? Sometimes I feel like I wouldn't want someone to go like, "Oh, well, whatever, David's a J," or not a whatever, "David's an I, so I need to change the way I interact with him socially." I sort of feel like we be pushed to figure out how we wanna interact with each other on our own without the scores? Because the scores distort how you I'm not sure if I'm articulating this well, but I feel like it gets in the way of a normal human interaction.
I disagree. I think you're giving broadly people you're assuming that others are going to be as interested in understanding why people do what they do more so than the average person is.
Oh,
This is
interesting.
something that interests the two of us. Obviously, that's why we chose this as our field of employment. I don't think when I talk about this and I get really excited when I'm talking with friends and family about all this stuff, I get some interest for a while.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then it's like, all right, well, he's talking about this shit again. I don't think that as many people outside of our bubble are as interested or curious or want to reflect upon this stuff as much as we do. And so I think these tools can be helpful again at that surface level to do that.
Mhm, mhm,
Because you're right. If I'm really focused and I observe you and I say, well, I wonder why this is happening.
mhm,
I wonder why he's doing this. I wonder what this means because he's doing this. then yeah, you're right. Then these tools can be a bit limiting. But I don't think that the average person does that.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's a fair that's probably fair.
And so this gives
Yeah.
you at least a place to start
Mhm.
with the downside that it's a bit limiting.
Yeah. I guess I'm reacting to 2 things. The first is as a hard P, I feel like the Ps are always asked to be less less hard, less extreme P,
Yeah, you
right?
want to be more of a flaccid P. I get it.
Yeah. You know what I mean? People but I guess I feel like there's if someone's like, "I'm a hard J," I don't know that there's this big push to be more middle of the road.
Sure, there is.
You think?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
so
I'm a defensive P.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, for sure that. But I think I mean the so we're talking about the judging versus perceiving. I mean, if you're really high on the J on the judging, right, that can be you're difficult, you're rigid, you're slow to change,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So you're overly like routine oriented. So
I
that's
guess
not
th
good either.
this is just me reacting to my world, which is I feel like everybody's telling me to tighten it up, and no one is going like, "Hey, I should loo that we should loosen it up."
Yeah, well, I think that's just
Maybe
your world.
this could just be
Yeah.
my world.
Yeah, I think this is as as is the case for about half of the episodes, this is just an excuse for Dave to get like talk out loud therapy for himself.
Yeah. Or
I
you won't
wonder why everyone in my life is telling me to get my shit together. I wonder what about yeah, it couldn't be me. I wonder about my environment
it
is
must could be
causing
a
this to
stressful.
happen.
It reminds me of one time I was talking to I was doing some kind of research on the, I don't know if you remember this or not, Rob, but I was, like, looking up research to say, "Okay, we know that in relationships, you know, in a traditional relationship, women don't always love it if every night they're being pursued by their husband." So I found some
Like
research.
sexually, okay.
Yes, and I found some research showing that, in relationships where the husband is pursuing the wife, they're oftentimes closer relationships. It does indicate that the husband is attracted to the wife, and that does feel good, that's validating,
Sure.
and so I think I came to you and I was like, you know, "I'm doing God's work." And then you said and you go, "No, no, that's me search." You
I
do you remember
vaguely
that?
remember that. Yes. Yes. You're looking to validate your own experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes
No,
sense.
I think I derailed this there, but yeah.
But yeah, so I think that's it. Is it doesn't have to be complete for it to be useful as long as and this is a big if, but as long as the constraints and understanding of what the tool is used for and what's not can be helpful.
Mhm.
Or
Yep.
or sorry, is understood.
Mhm.
I mentioned something else in passing that's another critique is in generally we think of personality as a more stable characteristic about a person, right? Nothing about a person is carved in stone, but your personality, my personality today, and our personalities 5 years in the future, barring some event, going to be pretty similar.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, very stable.
But the measurement of it can sometimes be a struggle. Just the measurement of anything can be a struggle. But tools like this can vary a lot more
Mhm. Mhm.
because they're a bit more surface
Mhm.
and maybe less robust. And I think that's the other critique is if it can feel disorienting for me to say, "Oh, you're an ENTP," and then you take it again, like, "Oh, 2 of your letters have changed. Well, what does that mean?
Right.
I
Right.
don't understand you now, or you don't understand yourself now, and how do you come to grips with some of that?"
Right.
So I
Yeah.
think that's also why it can be a struggle for folks is it is a bit more situational
Mhm.
at times than I think how people generally think of personality, which is a bit more on the stable side.
Yeah. Yeah, I think at least the way you and I work, we're very clear about having tools that are just measuring personality or
Mhm.
just measuring behavior or just measuring motivation. And a lot of these other tools are kind of having it all in one. And it's hard to know, well, what's moving the needle here to get the scores to change.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. And especially with the Myers-Briggs in particular, like we're talking about if you're, I think for the Myers-Briggs, each letter you have like a from a 1 to a 30 is the
Yeah.
score you can get.
Yeah.
but I don't know what all my scores are other than know that my the
No.
P is like a 30, right? But
Mhm.
that might be a 1 on the F. And so just a little bit of a different answer, and I'm all of a sudden gonna be at a T. And
Yep.
the fact that it's changing the entire type, I think is, a challenge with that tool.
Yeah. So because I convinced you of the utility of these tools, Dave,
Yeah.
um, how would you recommend that people listening to this use these types of tools in a way that is their best use?
I would say use them for fun, use them as, um I think they're good, like, fodder for team building.
Mhm.
I think they're good, like, they should be it should feel the process should feel good. In no way should it ever be limiting. I think
Right.
that's probably what I would say. Like, if you read something and you go, "That doesn't resonate," I would trust yourself over the assessment.
Yep.
But if it really resonates, then it's a fun thing to talk about and think about, what are the implications of that thing,
Yep.
um, you know, at work or personally.
I agree. I think it can be helpful certainly at work to better get to know yourself and how you might interact with other people at a surface level. Um, I think that to be a bit critical to understand, well, this is again surface. I'm not diving deep into, very specific components of who I am and why I do what I do, but it's giving me some initial insight that if I'm interested, there are other tools that are available where you can get some of that deeper insight.
Mhm, mhm. Which may be a good thing in a future episode, we could talk about it'd be interesting for us to talk about, like, what is the theoretical foundation or the research behind the bigger tools that we're talking about that
Yep.
you can use for selection? Like, how did we arrive at those
Yep.
global characteristics of personality?
Yep.
Um,
Yeah. I like that.
yeah.
Um, and I think they can be useful. I have suggested this before just as a fun thing for couples to use.
Mhm. Yeah,
Again,
that's a good
it's
idea.
with the appropriate caveats, but hey, like you hear someone complain about their significant other and not know why. If I know the person, I have some guesses. And yeah, I have had people, friends and family complete like our assessment battery, especially a couple of questionnaires that we use. I think it's fun.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think I think most other people don't think it's as fun as I think it is. Um, but but this tool, right? It doesn't require a ton of interpretation by a skilled person because I think it's surface level, it's in buckets. There's I think a bigger report that comes with it with some interpretation help. I think it could be useful in those situations too.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I just wouldn't wanna have Allison man, if she had the language to right, that really I would be held to account, I think, if she never mind, I don't know how to say it where it doesn't come across as sexual, but if she had to deal with my extreme P.
She already oh, there's so many jokes there.
Yeah, no,
Uh, yeah, no, there's I'm sure there's nothing too extreme about it. Let's finish this. You brought up Allison.
mhm.
What would you, if you had a guess? We talked about our spouses a lot on here. What is Allison? And I'll share what I think Jen is, or
I
maybe you know.
I think Allison is an ENFP also.
Okay,
I think that her P is even if there's a requirement for a new scale on the P. Between the 2 of us, I think I am closer to J than Allison is.
okay,
And I think that she's probably the only thing I don't know is where she would land on the introvert versus extrovert. My guess would be that she's probably closer to an I than I am. I think she's probably, like, right on the edge, introvert versus extrovert. I think she's 100% intuition.
okay,
I think she's 100% feeling, and I think she's high score on P.
okay.
What about for Jen?
I think Jen is I, so introverted as opposed to extroverted.
Mhm.
I think she is uh I'm sorry, I mean S, more sensing than intuition. I think she is more F, feeling than thinking. And I think that she is more J, so structure and planning versus P, perceiving. I think her and I are more different.
So, wait, so you're an E, she's an I. She's an S, you're an N.
Mhm.
What'd you say, feeling
We're
versus
both F,
you're both feeling.
and I think we're well, according to my more recent one, which I would take issue with, we're probably more on the J side, although I think she's a strong J and I'm a weak J.
Does that does that create some frustration in your is she pissed off about your little J?
I mean, the at times, a little J, it does its part, but it I'm gonna stop.
Insufficient.
Insufficient,
I
yeah,
understand.
insufficient J.
This is good. This is really unraveled, Rob.
We
This is
we we really wrapped
good.
it up, no pun intended, well here. Well, Dave, I think we covered this topic well. Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, I thought it was good. And those listening, if you want us to go deeper dive on the personality assessments that we use or the theoretical underpinnings, let us know in the comments below.
I would say I'd also be curious to hear what you all think about our conversation about these typologies, particularly the Myers-Briggs, but others. In the comments or in an email to us, let us know what your experience has been. Obviously, we're psychologists and we see it slightly differently than maybe folks who don't spend their days thinking about this. So you should let us know.
Yep. Perfect. Reach out to us at Shrink Space Show on Instagram, TikTok, and you can email us at shrinkspaceshow@gmail.com.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.